Welcome to the Eye of the Needle podcast, where we discuss healthcare innovation and explore how visionary entrepreneurs and change leaders are reshaping the future of our industry.
Hello, everyone. Pam Arlotto here, and welcome to the Eye of the Needle podcast. In 2026, your organization will not be judged by how much technology you've implemented or optimized. This is an operating model reckoning. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most health systems are not struggling because they lack tools. They are struggling because their leadership structure has not evolved at the same pace that their technology capability has moved forward. Last year, we introduced the concept of Martec's law. Technology capabilities accelerate rapidly. Organizations, including leadership structures, culture, governance, incentives, and workflows, change much more slowly. The gap between those two rates of change creates instability. More than 60% of hospitals are deploying generative AI. Over 80% report advanced analytics capabilities. Nationwide, information exchange networks are scaling and sharing data across the healthcare ecosystem, including health systems, providers, and payers. Prior authorization now costs the U.S. healthcare system between $25 and $35 billion annually, while the median hospital operating margin still hovers between 1% and 2%, and labor remains 50 to 60% of the operating expense. So while AI is scaling, data is flowing, our decision-making structure has not changed. In fact, given the complexity of healthcare, leaders are often forced to rely on silos, reporting structures, and legacy decision-making patterns that once worked but no longer fit the current environment. And under pressure, whether it be financial, regulatory, or operational, leadership attention narrows even further, creating leadership blind spots. So today we're going to discuss 5 of those blind spots that are all too common in healthcare. As we walk through the 5, I want you to ask, where do I see this in my organization? And where does this feel uncomfortably familiar regarding my own leadership style? Because blind spots are dangerous precisely because they feel normal. Let's begin. Blind spot number 1. We've installed technology without redesigning how decisions are made. So what does this look like? Today, you may have deployed ambient AI, and it's impacting clinical documentation. You may be using predictive analytics for care delivery. Operational dashboards are widely accessible, but a little dated in that they're not real time. The digital front door is a common strategic initiative, and yet AI recommendations are overridden consistently. Variation persists. Care decisions still rely heavily on traditional practice, and performance varies between similar units or organizations using the same system. A classic example there is Class's Arch Collaborative, where they looked at the same EHR across different organizations with hugely different satisfaction levels. Industry data tells us something important here. More than 80% of health systems report having advanced analytic capabilities, as I mentioned, but fewer than 30% say those insights consistently drive operational decisions. AI adoption is accelerating rapidly, but most organizations are just piloting and not really scaling that tool. Fewer than half have formal AI governance structures. So we have insight, we have AI, but we do not have a consistent discipline around how we make decisions. And that's a blind spot. So why does this blind spot exist? Well, implementation of a new tool or system is very visible, but changing behaviors is much harder. Capital budgets reward meeting your time deadlines and getting things implemented. Vendors sell functionality and features, but no one wants to renegotiate how we make decisions, the operating model, the design of the staff, etc. So changing decisions is cultural, and cultural shifts are much slower than deploying software or an analytics tool. So how do you recognize it? Ask yourself, do all of our departments and divisions interpret the same data the same way or differently? Are AI-generated recommendations treated as optional suggestions? Does performance vary widely across similar units? Do executive meetings focus more on the metric itself, having that dashboard or that scorecard, instead of actually performing differently or improving performance? If so, the technology evolved, but the decision-making processes haven't. So what needs to change? We need to move away from having access to things like analytics to requiring an operating discipline when we use those tools, those dashboards, those metrics. We need to clarify what's called a decision right. Where is the authority? Is the role advisory, or do you have the ultimate responsibility for making it? Where do we expect AI recommendations to be taken seriously? And how do we make sure any performance changes adhere to our operating standards? McKinsey and others estimate that AI could unlock hundreds of billions of value in healthcare, but value is captured only when decision discipline changes. So what will you notice if you actually fix this? Well, you'll reduce variability across your organization. You'll have more predictable performance levels. You'll be able to innovate, not just pilot, but innovate and scale. You'll have alignment across executive leaders, and the organization will become more disciplined and less reactive. So blind spot number 2. No one owns the entire patient journey. So what does this look like? Well, we have a lot of new roles in patient engagement, patient access, but unfortunately, the responsibilities or the decision and authority often lives in different silos, from marketing to operations to rev cycle to digital. And what we see is organizations naturally optimize a piece of the journey, not the entire journey itself. So what are some of those pieces? IT owns digital, clinicians own care delivery, rev cycle owns financial outcomes, HR owns workforce, and each leader optimizes their own domain. But who owns the experience across the entire journey? Well, a lot of organizations have put individuals into chief patient experience officers. But what we see quite frequently is those officers focus on metrics like HCAHPS or Press Ganey scores, or looking at operational metrics like throughput, versus truly examining all of the silos that contribute to that journey and making sure there's consistency in the handoffs between them, in the way they work, and the way care and the experience is orchestrated. So some of those silos: scheduling, referral management, financial management, or explaining the financial conditions, capacity planning, digital enablement, payer requirements, workforce and staffing. This is all very fragmented. And why does this exist? Well, our basic healthcare operating model or structure hasn't changed in over 75 years. It was built in functional silos. Incentives were developed to reinforce those silos. Board committees often mirror those silos, and no one is explicitly accountable for cross-domain work and the friction that often happens in those handoffs or in the lack of common approaches to work. So how do you recognize it within your own organization? If you're building a growth initiative in this patient engagement area where you're expanding something, you need to be aware it's going to create some downstream bottlenecks because you haven't been prepared for the growth. We see digital front door increasing volume, but not necessarily aligning capacity and the way the different silos work. Workforce strain often appears after you've expanded something, and executive meetings will report on the metrics, but they don't always resolve the integration across that journey. So ask who owns the friction across the entire journey and what type of friction are the patients experiencing? And if the answer is unclear, this blind spot exists. What needs to change? Well, you need to begin to think about creating enterprise coordination or orchestration mechanisms. Align your KPIs across departments, not just within a department or silo. Measure friction across episodes or across processes or workflows, and then assign accountability for cross-functional performance, not just one department or one unit's performance. So what will happen if you fix it? You're going to see reduced administrative waste, improved clinician experience, better patient outcomes, less leakage, enterprise efficiency gains, and coordination that becomes intentional, not just happenstance. Blind spot number 3, AI without executive level risk ownership. So what is that? Well, let me give you some examples. Today, we're seeing ambient scribe technology being rolled out across many organizations. It's influencing documentation, but it's also impacting coding specificity and reimbursement patterns. Clinical AI influences triage and diagnostic suggestions. Revenue AI includes and impacts coding patterns. Physician adoption of AI-enabled tools has more than doubled in recent years, yet fewer than half of organizations reporting having structured AI governance or oversight committees. Even fewer conduct routine monitoring of AI drift. And if that's a new term for you, let me share what AI drift is. It occurs when the performance or behavior of an AI model changes over time because the real world environment or the data that that environment produces changes. So some simple ways of understanding this is the AI algorithm or model was trained on yesterday's pattern. The world changes, the model doesn't. So some classic examples are patient demographics, payer mix, documentation patterns that ambient AI has driven, new coding standards, seasonal illness variations, time of day, demand and supply variations. So one thing to ask yourself is who owns enterprise AI risk? We're beginning to see some leaders take on the chief AI officer mantra, but it's more than just building out specific projects or pilots. It's not an implementation. It's about managing and monitoring risk. So if documentation patterns shift because ambient AI changes the narrative tone, or if case mix index rises unexpectedly, or an algorithm's bias emerges, who detects it, who reports it, who escalates it, and do we even have an inventory of all the AI we're using across our health system today? If not, this blind spot may exist. And why does it exist? Often it kind of sneaks in because it's embedded in a vendor platform, or responsibility is diffused across IT, clinical, legal, finance, etc. Sometimes competition in your market will pressure you to go fast. Governance lags deployment of the tool, and sometimes regulatory scrutiny and litigation related to AI may not be fully on everyone's radar, but we can guarantee you that we're going to be seeing a lot more of that this year in 2026 and in the future. Documentation influenced by AI is now squarely within audit scope. So how do we recognize if we have a problem? You don't have an enterprise AI registry or inventory. You have no drift thresholds or tools defined. You don't have an AI performance review process. The board is not formally briefed on AI, or they haven't developed a risk posture. So if performance is assumed, not measured, and oversight is insufficient, you have a blind spot. What needs to change? You need to establish enterprise AI governance, both at the board level, but at a management and operational level as well. Part of that would be completing that AI inventory comprehensively across the organization, identifying who at the executive level owns and manages risk. You'll have tools in place for drift and bias monitoring. You will look at the impact, particularly with ambient AI, on reimbursement and denials and other factors. And you'll have vendor transparency requirements. If you select a vendor that has AI embedded, you really need to understand and not just attribute it to their black box. So what will happen if you fix it? You'll reduce legal exposure in the next few years. You'll have more financial integrity. You'll be able to grow these projects in a more safe fashion. You may be able to differentiate yourself in the marketplace because you've deployed AI in a disciplined fashion. And governed AI will become a strategic advantage in the future. Blind spot number 4. Interoperability without strategic leverage. So what does that look like? You participate in health information exchange networks. You meet API standards. You've complied with the regulatory requirements, and you are understanding the implications of the nationwide exchange networks that are building, and you're participating. But what you will see if you haven't truly moved beyond interoperability for interoperability's sake is you'll still have duplicate testing. Care fragmentation will remain common. And we really do estimate across the industry that billions are still lost annually to redundant diagnostics and uncoordinated care. So despite over a decade actually, of interoperability investment, many organizations report minimal reduction in workflow burden. So the data moves, but the value doesn't necessarily move with it. So why? Why, after all this time, energy, and technology that we put into interoperability, why do we have these challenges? Well, it's really been framed as a compliance issue or an IT issue. You rarely see it integrated into things like service line strategy that builds out your network capability, or prior auth is still considered a revenue cycle workflow issue, as opposed to cross enterprise, where the health system and the payer are exchanging not just data, but workflow and design of how they work together. But we rarely coordinate that today. Leaders really underestimate what it means to be in a healthcare ecosystem and the economics surrounded that. So how do you recognize it? If you're a member of an information exchange, it's not changed your operational workflows at all. That's a challenge. You have no network-enabled service offerings. You have no measurable reduction in duplication, and leadership cannot really articulate what is their ecosystem advantage. So ask, how does interoperability strengthen our strategic position? And if the answer is vague, this blind spot exists. What needs to change? The exchange strategy and how it ties to your growth. How do you design network-enabled offerings? How do you align interoperability with service expansion? And how do you measure the outcomes of coordinating not just within your enterprise, but across enterprises? So what will happen? What will you notice if you fix this? You're going to see stronger referral positioning. Your partnerships, you'll actually be able to leverage them, reduce leakage. You'll be a little bit stronger competitively, and interoperability will become strategic capital for your organization. Blind spot number 5, our final one today, mistaking cost containment for strategy. What it looks like. Margins remain thin, still in that 1 to 3%. Labor is still 50 to 60 of your operating costs. And boards will focus on expense control. And what you'll see happening is innovation pilots will be paused. You'll do a reduction in force, eliminate all education. You'll consolidate tools or reduce contracts and with outside vendors or service providers. And 6 months later, workflow complexity is still there. You've not touched that. You've still got burnout. Your capabilities have stagnated. You're not seeing a lot of performance improvement or transformation. While costs maybe have declined, they're probably beginning to creep back up, and your strength and differentiation did not increase. So why does this exist today? Well, margin pressures are real. We don't have a lot of risk tolerance, and the pandemic created a volatile environment with a lot of fatigue around change. Boards want visible fiscal discipline, but they're still using historic approaches to that. And we see a lot of executive turnover in healthcare, and sometimes it's tied to the reality of this financial instability and stall transformation. It's easier to play it safe and have a defensive posture versus a proactive posture. So how do you recognize it? Every initiative must show ROI in 6 months. You won't go further. You don't play out the timetable it takes to innovate and scale and gradually build that ROI. There is no defined 3-year roadmap for operating model changes. Your strategy meetings are really focused on cost, not capability. Your talent attrition is rising. And so if you go to the gym, you'll appreciate this. So are you cutting waste or are you cutting muscle? What do we need to change? We need to develop a discipline around our portfolio that we're not just managing strategic initiatives, but we're redesigning roles, we're retraining positions for this new environment. We need a clear multi-year capability roadmap. We need plans not to just pilot, but to scale those innovations. We need to get our vendors involved in shared risk and partnership strategies to help deploy these efforts. And then we need to make sure that our long-term positioning is tied to a short-term discipline. So what will happen if you fix this blind spot? Well, you'll have sustainable innovation. You'll retain your talent. Your board will have confidence. You will be more resilient in your market, and cost discipline will be a strength, not a cut contraction. So let me bring this together. The blind spots are not about leadership competence. They're about Martec's law, about a structural lag. We've installed tools and technologies without redesigning the way we make decisions. We've optimized our silos without coordinating across the enterprise or outside the enterprise. We've scaled AI without owning and governing the risk. We're sharing data without leveraging strategy. And we're cost cutting without building and redesigning the way we work. So in 2026, our journey to high value healthcare model is 1.0 is going to be about proof, not just having a system of record and documenting it, proof that we actually did it. 2.0 is about accountability, using those analytics and those tools to really be accountable for our decisions. 3.0 is not just about digital front door and digital patient engagement, but orchestrating that journey. And 4.0 is not just innovating, but truly scaling those changes. And these are leadership responsibilities. The organizations that will succeed in 2026 and beyond will not just be the most digital. They will be the most disciplined. So here's a final question for you. Are you still operating in a world where decisions can be slow, siloed, and consensus driven, or are you moving to a world where decisions can be fast, network, and data centric? Or does it expose your blind spots? That's the reckoning for 2026, but it's also our opportunity. So, in future episodes of this series, we'll dig further into the implications of this changing world. Thank you for listening.